island has continued making various reforms with their new democracy, while some traditions still remain, including having a seigneur in the first place. But overall, by technical definition, feudalism was finally abolished in Europe in 2008. Hey everyone, thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, but also if you want to support this channel, you can support it with my Patreon, but also we now have channel memberships open as well. The same benefits as Patreon, but there are also exclusive perks for live streams if you're interested.
Did you know? There's been dozens of unreleased games that have since been recovered and preserved online. Video games that we thought were lost forever have come back in the strangest ways, sometimes decades after they were canceled. We touched on this topic back in May of 2022, but there's just so many fascinating stories about lost games that we had to come back a second time. Today we'll take a look at 4 games, why they were never released, how they got discovered, and where they are now. These are stories about canceled games that were released online by their creators, given away as gifts, or even stolen in a heist. Look for some exclusive information in this video, as there will be plenty of it from the developers, collectors, and historians we contacted who helped get these games online. Let's start off with one of the most infamous canceled games in history, Star Fox 2. Star Fox 2 is a rare example of a canceled project that eventually got an official release. After years of various builds getting leaked online, Nintendo announced the finished game would be bundled with their then upcoming Super NES Classic Edition. Like its predecessor, Star Fox 2 was co-developed by Nintendo EAD in Japan and Britain's Argonaut Software, who had formed a tight bond since their connection in the early 90s. The company originally had a 3-title deal with Nintendo, where they had to develop games using their high-tech Super FX chip. The original Star Fox was one of these games. 2 British programmers from Argonaut, Giles Goddard and Dylan Cuthbert, were sent back to Japan and split off, with Goddard working on Stunt Race FX, while Cuthbert led development on the sequel to Star Fox. The development of Star Fox 2 started right after the first game was finished. According to leaked snippets of the game's source code, programming began on February 16, 1993, 5 days before Star Fox was released in Japan. Cuthbert would serve as the lead programmer on the project, with 2 Nintendo EAD coders working under him. It was a small team of people overseen by Shigeru Miyamoto and director Katsuya Eguchi. Cuthbert recalls living in Kyoto during the production of Star Fox 2, having limited contact with Argonaut or the outside world in general. Both technically and in design, Star Fox 2 was a much more complex game than the original. It was decided early on that the title should use more powerful, and with extra memory, the game could go beyond the on-rails shooter and give the player the ability to soar in any direction. It took months of planning to decide what Star Fox 2 would be. At first, it was literally up in the air. Eguchi wanted a more roguelike game set deep in the darkest corners of space, heavily inspired by a Famicom game called Starluster. While researching the game's overall feel, Cuthbert tinkered with the R-Wing's ability to transform and developed a 3D platforming prototype. It was then decided this was the way to go. The sequel would be half strategic space shooter and half low-ground dungeon crawler. Shigeru Miyamoto considered the original Star Fox an experimental platform, so it was natural that the next game would feature many new ideas that pushed the SNES to its limits. Star Fox 2's story takes place right after the events of the first game. The main antagonist, Andross, returns to invade the army of Corneria, and it's up to Team Star Fox to save the day. Falco, Fox, Peppy, Slippy, and 2 fresh female companions. On their way, the group encounters many evil entities throughout space. Most notably, they meet Team Star Wolf, the evil counterpart to Team Star Fox. Star Fox 2 would include a plethora of new characters. In addition to the wicked Star Wolf team, there were 2 new playable heroes, Miyu, a courageous lynx, and Faye, a little white poodle. There were plenty of other ideas for the updated Star Fox team. Looking at leaked sprite sheets, we can see designs for all sorts of creatures that could have made it into the game. There were gazelles, bison, bears, sheep, lemurs, dogs, pigs, rabbits, robots, and, interestingly, African American women. Were this in the final product, it would have been the first human character to appear in a Star Fox game, and one of the earliest examples of black representation in a Nintendo title. The exact name of this character, if they ever had one, is unknown, and Dylan Cuthbert has no memory of their creation. Star Fox 2 made its public debut at the Consumer Electronics Show in January 1995. Nintendo spent most of its time at the show promoting upcoming Super FX games, with Star Fox 2 as the top title. Coverage was mostly positive, with the game making the front cover of several magazines. It was clear that people were ready for more Star Fox. Star Fox 2 was finished by mid-1995 and was planned for release in August. However, at the end of development, it became apparent that 3D technology was advancing far quicker than anyone at Nintendo could have imagined. Star Fox 2 would look obsolete only months after its release. Nintendo didn't want to risk this and decided to scrap the project last minute. In a 2015 talk with Nintendo Life, Cuthbert recalls, "It was the summer of 1995, and the PlayStation and Saturn were suddenly doing very well in Japan. I think that caught Nintendo off guard. The decision was made because they didn't want the old Gen 3D going up against the much better 3D of the next generation side by side. The game was about 95% complete. Even after the decision was made, Argonaut went ahead and completed it, taking it to be fully QA'd through Nintendo's testing subsidiary Mario Club. Nintendo decided to focus on titles for the upcoming Nintendo 64, including a new Star Fox game which began production right after Star Fox 2 was cancelled. You can see many elements of Star Fox 2 in Star Fox 64, such as Team Star Wolf and all-range mode battles. Cuthbert would leave Argonaut for Sony, as their contract with Nintendo was up. He couldn't stay in Kyoto due to a non-poaching agreement after Giles Goddard quit Argonaut to work for Nintendo EAD. Both Nintendo and Cuthbert would keep final copies of Star Fox 2 in their archives as a memento of a project they spent 2 years on, only for nobody to see it. Star Fox 2 leaking to the internet was inevitable. At the CES show in 1995, an Arizona man named Sean J. Freeman was arrested for attempting to steal a copy of Star Fox 2. Freeman, who was charged with felony petty theft, allegedly planned to pirate the game. He was caught in the middle of the show floor and tackled by Las Vegas police. With the rise of emulation in the late 90s, there was more interest in finding lost games that were never released. Sometime in 1999, an early alpha leaked onto ROM sites. This version contains numerous bugs and consists of debug menus and a broken multiplayer mode. Not the ideal way to play the holy grail of lost Nintendo games. Another prototype leaked onto a German fan translations site in August 2002. It was a Japanese build much further along that was eventually discovered to be a near-final prototype dated June 1995. This version originated from an assembled binary kept by an anonymous Argonaut developer. Cuthbert denies being the person who released this ROM and suspects they were stolen from his hard drive after he went to Sony. Whoever the culprit was, they brought Star Fox 2 to the internet, and we thank them for it. The story was over. At least, it was until 2017 when Nintendo announced the SNES Classic. The dedicated console would include 21 pre-installed games, one of which being the final build of Star Fox 2. 20 years after it got cancelled, the game was finally released. It even got a new box art drawn by Takaya Imamura, Star Fox's original character designer. The announcement shocked everyone, including Dylan Cuthbert, who programmed the title over 2 decades ago. As Cuthbert told GamesIndustry.biz, "I didn't know about it at all. My company does not have any work with Nintendo right now, so there wouldn't have been an NDA-safe way of letting me know anyway. On the other hand, I got to have a big awesome surprise like everyone else, so I'm quite happy about that. It's an absolutely awesome feeling. Incredible, really. Perhaps a first in the games industry even." The decision to include Star Fox 2 in the SNES Classic came from one of Nintendo's producers, who thought it was a waste not to release it in the world. It was known for years that Nintendo had a master build of the ROM. It was even used when Dylan Cuthbert worked on Star Fox Command for the Nintendo DS, with them giving him the file for research. Nintendo has a dense archive, which can be seen in the infamous 4chan Giga Leak, where tons of material from the company's history, including Star Fox 2 ROMs and source code, were spread online in 2020. Star Fox 2 had a long journey getting online, from an attempted robbery to an anonymous leak to an official release from Nintendo. But believe it or not, this isn't the only title to go through this pipeline. Another game was involved in an even crazier heist. This cancelled game that eventually got an official release is Aka-R, an arcade title planned to be released by Atari in the early 80s. Before it was leaked through somewhat controversial circumstances, Aka-R was considered a white whale among arcade collectors, a title that would likely never be shared online. A cross between Atari's Tempest and Missile Command, the game is a space shooter where players use a trackball to defend their ship. Depending on the distance between you and the enemies, the game constantly shifts between 2 screens of warfare. Aka-R was the work of 3 developers at Atari: Mike Halley, Dave Ralston, and John Salwitz. Mike Halley was recruited out of college in 1977 to work in Atari's pinball division, but would move to arcade game development. Dave Ralston joined the pinball division in 1979, their final year before closure, and would also jump to arcades. Because of their similar backgrounds, Halley and Ralston collaborated on a project that merged elements of pinball and video games. Halley was on programming, and Ralston was on art. The game would be known as Penetration, a hybrid game where players shoot a pinball through hoops to destroy space invaders and blow funny rings on the screen. It was eventually renamed Aka-R, likely because no one would take a game called Penetration seriously. There are conflicting stories on the meaning behind the title Aka-R. Many believe the name was a jab at Atari for not giving their talent the credit they deserved. Aka-R could be an acronym for an also known as another Ralston-Halley production. In interviews, John Salowitz has a similar, slightly less messy answer. The name was an inside joke about another employee at Atari, programmer Rich Adam. Adam previously worked on Missile Command, among other things, and once signed a document with a fictitious name and added, also known as Rich Adam. Also known as Rich Adam could be shortened to AKA-R or Aka-R. Whatever the truth is, the name was unofficial. Were it to have an official release, the game would have a different, more marketable title. Potential names included the Sentinel and Target Outpost. This was around the time when John Salowitz entered the picture. Hired by Atari in October 1981, Salowitz joined at the end of the Part Pinball Part video game idea. The team found that the pinball action wasn't adding much other than cost, and switched to traditional video gameplay. Here was the start of the Aka-R we can play today. The trio worked on the game for about 6 months before field testing. In early 1982, Atari sent a cabinet to a location in Florida, where it was tested against a little-known game, you might have heard of it, called Robotron 2084. With its high-speed movement and addictive gameplay, Robotron destroyed the competition. Aka-R only made about $30 after about a week. It was clear who the winner was, and Atari decided to cancel Aka-R. The game, while essentially finished, would never be manufactured. Despite this poor first start, the three would find success following the game's cancellation. John Salowitz and David Ralston thought their time at Atari was over. However, executive Dan Van Elderman told them, "Great try for a bunch of rookies. What are you going to do next?" Ralston then pitched a game about a delivery boy riding his bike down the street, an idea that would eventually become Paperboy in 1985. The duo continued collaborating for years, moving from Atari to Electronic Arts, and eventually starting their own company, Blue Shift. As for Mike Halley, he stayed at Atari for years, having a big hand in everything from 1983's Star Wars to 1995's Area 51. Now, only 3 Aka-R cabinets are known to exist, all of which eventually ended up in the hands of private collectors. Each cabinet was rescued from Atari's warehouses or bought directly from the development team. Mike Halley recalls being paid about $3,000 for his copy. Although ROMs were never shared, several private collectors lent their cabinets out for free to play at conventions, allowing the public to experience something they couldn't elsewhere. Despite this generosity, many were disappointed that Aka-R never made it online. But on April 15, 2019, something unbelievable happened. On the MAME World forums, a place dedicated to preserving and emulating arcade games, a prototype made it onto the internet. Aka-R was dumped by an anonymous donor and shared with the masses. After 37 years, the game could finally be played by anyone at any time. But the story did not end there. 3 days after the announcement, a user going by the handle Atari Scott entered the forum with a controversial claim. Aka-R was stolen and leaked online by an unscrupulous ROM. This person, whose identity is still unknown, entered one of the collector's homes disguised as a repairman. He was brought in to fix some of his broken arcade cabinets. When the collector wasn't looking, he ran to the Aka-R machine, opened it up, and copied the ROM without permission, and then anonymously uploaded the files. This comment from Atari Scott would be their first and last comment on the MAME World forum. The man behind the account was believed to be Scott Evans, a well-known collector in the community who amassed dozens of rare, unreleased arcade prototypes. At one point, he owned not one, but 2 Aka-R cabinets, both of which have likely been sold off. Following an investigation from Ars Technica, another anonymous high-end collector came out with the same story. It can be argued that this was the worst way to go about video game preservation, as the ROM repairman stole data from the person who saved the arcade game, rather than forming an actual relationship with the collector and building a path to public preservation. The brothers pissed them off and made them double down. But with the game now on the internet, it was reunited with the owners of the Atari license. They still owned the rights, meaning it could be officially released. And in 2021, Aka-R was bundled with the Arcade 1-Up's Atari Legacy cabinet alongside 13 other titles. In 2022, it was part of Atari 50, a curated collection of more than 90 playable Atari games throughout its history. There's a few other unreleased games in Atari 50, and if you sort by date, you can see them grouped together since they don't have a release date. Atari 50 came out in 2022 for Switch, Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. On December 7th, 2022, while we were writing this script, Atari announced a reboot of Aka-R, a reimagining by legendary game designer Jeff Minter. This would be a modern take on the 1982 title, with psychedelic elements seen in Minter's previous work. The game was released on February 21st, 2023 to positive reviews. Despite its controversial ROM release, Aka-R would see a happy ending. We briefly mentioned how Aka-R was cancelled because of the success of another arcade game, Robotron 2084. But Robotron is also linked to another lost title that was later found. However, before we get into it, we need to explain a little about Robotron's background. Released by Atari competitor Williams Electronics in 1982, Robotron is one of the most iconic arcade titles of the Golden Age. The game is a frantic, top-down arcade shooter where the player runs around killing an onslaught of robots to save humanity, and its influence is still felt to this day. Robotron was developed by VidKids, a design firm founded by ex-Williams employees who eventually had a few unreleased games of their own. VidKids was started by programmers Eugene Jarvis and Larry DeMar. Jarvis was another member of Atari's pinball division who left to Williams in 1979. DeMar was a computer science graduate working for Bell Labs, who left his job for the video game market in 1980. When the two started at Williams, the company was just turning to arcade titles and was described by Jarvis as an abandoned factory in complete isolation. With such a small staff and little knowledge of the technology, it offered the programmers plenty of creative freedom. A small team led by Jarvis created Williams' first original game. Months of work led to Defender, a scoring space shooter released in December 1980. Defender was a smash hit, selling 55,000 units and dethroning Atari's Astro as the top-earning arcade game in the United States. Defender's success brought Williams' business way up, and Jarvis and DeMar's way down. Jarvis believed that, thanks to their team, management was able to design more hits like Defender. He thought that the quiet, enjoyable atmosphere Williams once had was gone. This was when the duo left in 1981 to form VidKids, an independent company that could develop arcade games the way they wanted. Its headquarters were based